I was sitting on the back porch with my second cup of coffee when my phone buzzed. It was just past 7 in the morning. The kind of quiet Tuesday where the neighborhood hadn't woken up yet, and the only sound was a mockingbird going through its whole repertoire in the oak tree by the fence. I remember thinking it was probably my buddy Gerald calling to cancel our fishing trip. I almost let it go to voicemail. It wasn't Gerald. It was my son-in-law, Marcus. Now, I want you to understand something about Marcus before I go any further. He was not a man I had ever felt entirely easy around. Not because he was cruel to me, or even particularly rude. He was polite in the way that some people are polite correctly. Precisely. Like he had read a manual on it. He shook my hand firmly at holidays. He remembered to ask about my knee surgery. He never raised his voice, but there was always something behind his eyes that I couldn't quite read. A kind of flatness, like a lake that looks calm, because nothing living is moving underneath it. My daughter, Renée, had married him 11 years ago. She was 31 then, and I thought she was happy. I told myself she was happy. Fathers do that. She passed away 3 years ago. Ovarian cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. I held her hand at Mercy General on a Wednesday afternoon in October, and when she was gone, the whole shape of my life changed in a way I still don't have good words for. You don't get over losing your child. You just learn to carry it differently as time goes on. After Renée died, Marcus stayed in their house across town with their son, my grandson Danny. Danny was 7 when his mother passed. He's 10 now. I saw them at Thanksgiving and Christmas. Marcus was always correct about that. He would bring Danny over, stay for the meal, leave at a reasonable hour. Danny was quiet. I told myself that was grief. Kids process things differently. I told myself a lot of things, so when Marcus called that Tuesday morning, I was surprised but not alarmed. He told me he had a work trip, a conference in Denver, 4 days. Leaving that afternoon, his usual babysitter had fallen through and he was in a bind. Could I take Danny for the week? I said yes, before he even finished the sentence. Of course I said yes. Danny is my grandson. He's the last piece of Renée I have in this world. Marcus dropped him off around 2 that afternoon. Danny climbed out of the car with a backpack and a small duffel bag. He was thin. I noticed that right away, thinner than the last time I'd seen him, which had been Christmas, about 10 months earlier. His jeans were a size too big, cinched with a belt that looked like it had been punched with an extra hole. He stood on my front walk and watched Marcus pull away without waving. I brought him inside and asked if he was hungry. He said no. I showed him the guest room, which I'd already set up with clean sheets and the extra pillow from the hall closet. He put his bag on the floor and stood there looking at the bed like he was trying to figure something out. I asked him if he wanted to watch some TV, maybe play a game. He shrugged. I asked him how school was going. He said fine, 1 syllable at a time. Like words cost him something. I made spaghetti for dinner because I remembered it was something he liked when he was younger. He ate about half of it and kept looking at me between bites, with this expression I couldn't name at the time. Now I know what it was. He was watching to see if I was going to take the plate away. That night I checked on him before I went to bed. He was asleep, or pretending to be. He was lying on top of the covers with his shoes still on. I took his shoes off as carefully as I could and covered him up and stood there in the doorway for a minute. He looked so small. The next morning I made eggs and toast and orange juice and called him down to the kitchen. He came downstairs already dressed, backpack on, like he was ready to leave wherever he was going, as quickly as possible. He sat down at the table and looked at the plate in front of him and didn't touch it. I sat down across from him and asked him if something was wrong with the eggs. He shook his head. I asked if he wanted something different. Cereal, maybe. Or pancakes. He shook his head again. And then I asked him why he wasn't eating. He looked up at me. And In the quietest voice, a voice so small, it barely made it across the table. He said, "Am I supposed to eat breakfast today?" I didn't understand at first. I thought maybe I'd misheard him. I asked him what he meant. He said, "Dad doesn't always do breakfast." I didn't know if this was a breakfast day. I kept my face very still. I have no idea how. Something was happening in my chest that I can only describe as a door swinging open onto a room I didn't know was there. And what was in that room was dark and cold and made my hands want to shake. I told him that every day was a breakfast day at my house. I told him to eat as much as he wanted. I told him there was more in the pan if he wanted seconds. He picked up his fork. He ate every bite on the plate. He ate 2 more pieces of toast. He drank all his orange juice and then looked at the empty glass like he wasn't sure what to do next. I asked him if he wanted more juice. He said, "Is that okay?" I poured him more juice and sat back down and told him that in my house he could always have more of anything. He nodded slowly, like he was filing that information away, somewhere important. I drove him to school that morning, and on the way I asked him carefully, trying to keep my voice easy and normal, what a regular day at home was like with his dad. He didn't answer for a while. We stopped at a red light, and I watched a man walking a golden retriever on the sidewalk, and I waited. Danny said his dad worked a lot. He said there was usually food in the fridge, but sometimes his dad forgot to go to the grocery store. He said he knew how to make a bowl of cereal, and sometimes that was dinner. He said sometimes it wasn't a cereal day either. I asked him what happened on days when there wasn't cereal. He said he went to bed. I pulled into the school drop-off lane and sat there a moment after he got out, watching him walk through the doors with his too big backpack. Then I drove home and sat in my driveway for about 10 minutes before I could go inside. I want to be clearer about what I did next, because some people might think I jumped to conclusions. I didn't. I am 63 years old, and I spent 22 years as a high school history teacher before I retired. I have known hundreds of kids. I know the difference between a child who skips breakfast because they'd rather sleep in and a child who asks permission to eat. Those are not the same thing. I started paying attention. That afternoon when I picked Danny up, I made him a snack without asking apples with peanut butter, the way Renee used to make for herself when she was his age. He ate it so fast I almost didn't see it happen. I made him another plate. He slowed down for the second one, like he was reminding himself it was allowed. While he ate, I asked him about school, slowly, over apple slices. He started talking. His teacher was Mrs. Patterson. He liked math. He didn't have a lot of friends because he'd missed a lot of days. I asked why he'd missed days. He said sometimes he didn't feel good. I asked what kind of not feeling good. He said hungry, sick. He said his stomach hurt in the mornings sometimes, and then by the time he felt okay enough to go in, it was already afternoon. Hungry, sick. A 10-year-old boy, using the words hungry, sick, like it was a standard category of illness, like a cold or a headache. That night after dinner, I'd made more than enough, and made sure he knew it. I told him we could watch whatever he wanted on TV. He picked a nature documentary about the ocean, which surprised me. We sat on the couch and I had a beer, and he had hot chocolate, and we watched footage of whale sharks moving through blue water. And for the first time since he'd arrived, he looked something close to relaxed. During a commercial, I asked him, very gently, if he was happy at home. He kept his eyes on the TV. He said, "It's fine." Kids say it's fine the same way adults do. They mean the same thing by it. I asked him if there was anything he wished was different. He was quiet for a long time. The commercial ended, and the whale shark came back on the screen. Enormous, and slow, and somehow peaceful. He said, "I wish I had a lamp in my room." I asked him why. He said his dad had taken the lamp out of his room a few months ago. He didn't say why. He just said the room was dark now, and he didn't like the dark, but he wasn't supposed to say anything about it. I said, "Who told you not to say anything?" he said. "Dad says complaining makes things worse." I bought a lamp the next morning after I dropped him off. A good one, with a warm bulb. I put it on the nightstand in the guest room and left it on so he'd see it when he got home from school. When he walked in that afternoon and went upstairs to put his backpack down, I heard him go quiet in the room for a moment. When he came back downstairs, his eyes were red at the edges. He didn't say anything about the lamp. He just sat down at the kitchen table for his snack and said, "Thank you for the juice yesterday." I said, "You're welcome. Danny, you can always just help yourself to juice." He nodded. He was working very hard not to cry. I could see it. I looked away to give him some privacy with it. Over the next 2 days, he opened up a little more. Not all at once, not in any dramatic way where he sat down and told me everything. It was more like a window that had been painted shut. And each day, I was there with him. It opened another fraction of an inch. I didn't push. I just kept the refrigerator full, and the meals regular, and the TV on in the evenings. And I let him know in small, consistent ways that nothing bad was going to happen at my house. What I pieced together, slowly, was this. After Renee died, Marcus had gone through something. I don't know exactly what to call it. A breakdown. A collapse. Something in him that failed. He didn't stop functioning. Not on the surface. He went to work. He paid the bills. He maintained the house well enough that no one from the outside would have had reason to look twice. But inside that house, something had gone very wrong in how he was managing. And Danny was the one living with the consequences of it. The food was the clearest thing. Some days Marcus fed him normally. Other days, and Danny couldn't predict which days would be which, he didn't. It wasn't that there was never food in the house. It was that Danny had learned he needed permission. He had learned that eating without being told was something that could make his father angry. So he waited. He waited to be told it was okay. The lamp was one of several things that had been removed from his room over the preceding year. Danny didn't volunteer all of this directly. I put it together from things he said and didn't say. From the way he flinched sometimes, when I came around a corner. From the way he always cleared his own plate before I asked, and stood very straight when I raised my voice even slightly, and I hadn't raised my voice at him. Not once. But old habits don't know the difference. There was something else. His arms. On the third night, he was getting ready for bed, and I was in the hallway, and his bedroom door was partially open, and I saw him changing his shirt. I saw the bruising on his upper arm. Not fresh, yellowish. The kind that's already fading, but significant. The kind that doesn't come from running into a door frame. I knocked on the door and asked if I could come in. He pulled his shirt down fast. I sat on the edge of the bed, and I kept my voice very calm, and I told him I'd seen his arm, and that he wasn't in trouble, and that I just wanted to know if he was okay. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "Dad gets frustrated sometimes." I asked what happened when Dad got frustrated. He said, "He doesn't mean it." I had taught high school for 22 years. I had sat across from students who said those exact words about their home situations. I knew what they meant. They meant this is real, and I'm terrified to say it's real. And if you make it real by reacting to it, something terrible might happen. I told Danny that I believed him that his dad didn't mean it. I told him that still wasn't okay. I told him he hadn't done anything wrong, and I was very glad he was here with me. He cried then, not dramatically, just quietly, with his hands in his lap and his head down, the way kids cry, when they've been told for a long time that crying is a problem. I put my arm around him and didn't say anything, and after a while he stopped. I didn't sleep much that night. In the morning, after I dropped Danny off at school, I called my attorney. Her name is Patricia, and she's been handling my affairs since before Renee was born. Wills and property, and the occasional dispute. I told her what I knew. She listened without interrupting, and when I was done, she told me that what I was describing crossed several thresholds that I needed to take seriously, and that I had legal standing as a grandparent to petition for emergency custody given what I'd observed. She told me I should document everything, write it down. Dates and details. Exactly as I'd experienced it. She told me I should also contact Child Protective Services. I want to be honest with you about how I felt about that. I had watched enough news to know that CPS doesn't always get it right. I knew from talking to people over the years that the system is overwhelmed and underfunded, and that calls don't always result in action. I was afraid that if I called and nothing happened, Marcus would find out, and Danny would go back to that house, and things would get worse. But I also thought about a boy who asked if he was supposed to eat breakfast. I thought about a lamp being removed from a child's bedroom. I thought about the bruising on his arm and the words "he doesn't mean it" spoken by a 10-year-old who had clearly said them many times before, practicing them until they came out smooth enough to be believed. I made the call. The caseworker's name was Diane. She was professional and thorough, and asked me detailed questions. And she told me that given what I was reporting, she would initiate an investigation and that I should keep Danny with me in the meantime. I asked her what that meant for when Marcus came back from Denver. She told me to call her before I did anything. I also called Danny's school. I spoke to the principal and asked about his attendance record and his general well-being as observed by his teachers. The principal was quiet for a moment and then told me that they had had some concerns. That Danny's homeroom teacher had flagged him twice in the past year for coming in looking hungry and tired. That there had been bruising noted in the fall. I asked why no report had been made. She told me a report had been submitted to CPS in November. I asked what had happened with that report. She didn't have an answer for me. That report in November had apparently been closed without action. I don't know all the reasons why. I do know that the system failed my grandson at least once before I made my call, and I think about that often. Marcus came back from Denver on a Friday evening. He texted me in the afternoon to say he'd pick Danny up at 6. I called Patricia. She told me what to say and what not to say. I called Diane, the caseworker, and she told me that the investigation was active and that I could legally decline to release Danny to Marcus's custody pending the outcome, and that if Marcus became confrontational, I should call the police. I will tell you that calling the police on my daughter's husband was not something I had ever imagined doing. None of this was something I had ever imagined doing. But I kept thinking about Danny at the breakfast table, Falkenhent, waiting for permission. And it gave me a clarity I might not have otherwise had. Marcus knocked on my front door at 6:03. I opened it. He looked tired from traveling, and he smiled at me the way he always did. That correct, precise smile. He asked if Danny was ready. I told him Danny was staying with me for a while longer. The smile didn't disappear so much as it reorganized into something else. He asked me what I meant. I told him there was an open CPS investigation, and that my attorney had advised me to keep Danny in my care until the situation was clarified. I kept my voice level. I had practiced what I was going to say on the drive back from dropping Danny off that morning. I had written it down and said it out loud in my car 6 times. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You had no right to do that." I said, "I had every right. He's my grandson." He said, "He's my son." I said, "I know he is, and I think you know that something needs to change." He left. He didn't make a scene, which surprised me. He just walked back to his car and drove away. I closed the front door and stood in the hallway for a minute. My legs were shaking a little. Then I heard Danny call from the living room, asking if that was his dad. I went in and sat on the couch next to him and told him that his dad had come by, but that he was going to be staying with me for a bit longer while some grown-up things got sorted out. I told him he wasn't in trouble, and neither was anyone else. Right at this moment, I told him we could order pizza for dinner. He said, From the place with the garlic bread, I said yes. He said okay, and turned back to the television. And I sat with him and tried to remember how to breathe normally. The next few weeks were not simple. I won't pretend they were. Patricia filed for emergency temporary guardianship, which was granted given the documented evidence, my written records, the school's reports, the CPS investigation that was now properly open and moving. Marcus retained a lawyer. There were hearings. There were evaluations. A guardian ad litem was appointed to represent Danny's interests independently. A woman named Dr. Susan Hale, who spoke with Danny several times over several weeks and who I will be grateful for the rest of my life. Because she listened to him the way he needed to be listened to. I'll tell you something that happened during that period that I think about often. Dr. Hale asked Danny, in one of their sessions, whether he wanted to say anything to the judge about where he wanted to live. Danny thought about it for a while. Then he said he wanted to stay with his grandfather, because at his grandfather's house, he knew that every day was a breakfast day. She included that in her report. I read it 3 times. Marcus, to his credit. And I say that understanding how strange it sounds did not fight the process the way I had feared he might. At some point, through his attorney, he communicated that he was willing to undergo a psychological evaluation and enter a structured treatment program. The evaluation revealed what I think many people in his life had sensed but never named: a severe depressive disorder, complicated grief following Renee's death, and what the evaluating psychologist described as a maladaptive control pattern that had developed in the absence of treatment. He had been suffering badly for 3 years. He had never asked for help. He had taken that suffering and let it settle into the structure of his home, and his son had been living inside it. I am 63 years old, and I have had complicated feelings about Marcus for 11 years. I am not going to tell you that I forgave him easily or completely, or that I fully understand what happened in that house. What I can tell you is that at the next hearing, when I saw him looking at Danny from across the room, not the correct, precise look, but something rawer and more frightened, like a man who has just understood the full size of what he nearly lost. I thought about what Renee would have wanted. She would have wanted her son safe. She would also have wanted the father of her son to become someone who deserved to be in that boy's life. I can hold both of those things at the same time. I have had to learn to. The court awarded me full guardianship of Danny. Marcus was permitted supervised visitation, twice monthly, contingent on his continued participation in treatment. His attorney also raised, and the court agreed, that he would establish a structured child support arrangement that would contribute to Danny's care while he remained with me. That mattered. I am retired, and I manage fine. But raising a 10-year-old costs real money, and the acknowledgement that it was his responsibility was something I needed to see happen. That was 7 months ago. Danny is in 5th grade now. He has a lamp in his room, the one I bought, which he asked if he could keep when it became clear he was staying. He has a second one now, on his desk, for homework. He's been eating well enough that his doctor at the last checkup noted he'd gained 8 pounds. Which put him back in the normal range for his age and height. He's made 2 friends at school, boys named Carlos and Theo, who have been to the house 3 times now, and who eat everything I put in front of them, and track mud in from the backyard, and make a tremendous amount of noise, and I love every minute of it. He still sometimes asks before he takes something from the refrigerator. Not as often as he used to. We're working on it. Dr. Hale told me that kind of hypervigilance can take a long time to ease, and that the best thing I can do is keep being consistent and predictable and let him see over and over again that the rules don't change. So that's what I do. Every day is a breakfast day. Every day is a dinner day. Every day. If he's hungry, he eats. It is, in the end, A simple thing to offer a child, though I understand now that it isn't simple at all. Last month, Marcus came for one of his supervised visits. Danny had agreed to it. They sat at my kitchen table, and I made myself scarce in the backyard, though I stayed close enough to come back quickly if I needed to. They were in there for about an hour. When Marcus left, he stopped on the porch and looked at me for a moment, and he said thank you. I don't know exactly what he was thanking me for. Maybe for making the call. Maybe for not making it a war. Maybe just for keeping his son fed while he was unable to. I said, take care of yourself. Marcus, for his sake. He nodded and walked to his car. Danny came out onto the porch a few minutes later and stood next to me. We watched a squirrel do something ridiculous in the oak tree for a while. Then he leaned against my arm. The way kids do when they don't have a word for what they want to say. And I put my hand on top of his head the way I used to do with Renee when she was small. We stood there like that until the squirrel decided it had made its point and moved on. I don't tell you this story because it has a clean ending. Because it doesn't. Marcus has a long road ahead of him. Danny has things inside him that won't resolve quickly. I am 63 years old, with a bad knee and a retired teacher's pension, learning how to help a 10-year-old with his math homework and figure out what kids his age are supposed to eat for lunch now. There are days that are harder than I expected. There are nights I sit on the back porch with my coffee and miss Renee so much it feels like a physical weight. But there are also mornings. Mornings when I come downstairs and Danny is already in the kitchen, having poured himself a bowl of cereal without asking anyone's permission, just eating because he is hungry, and he knows that's allowed. He looks up when I come in and he says, "Good morning." And I say, "Good morning." And I put the coffee on, and we go about the business of the day. Those mornings are worth everything. If there is anyone watching this who has a child in their life, a grandchild, a niece or nephew, a neighbor's kid, to a student, and something feels wrong, please pay attention to that feeling. Ask the quiet questions. Notice the small things. A child who asks permission to eat is telling you something. Listen. And if you're sitting with something hard right now, the way Marcus was sitting with something hard for 3 years without ever asking for help, please reach out to someone before it becomes the walls your child lives inside. There is no shame in being someone who is struggling. There is only what you do next. I'm going to go check if Danny wants a snack.